Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Got a story out of Wisconsin sent to me by several people about the DMV there screwing up. And you might say, Steve, the DMV screws up all the time. It's what they do. It's their one job. Yes, but to make the news, they got to screw up really bad because they themselves have set the bar so terribly low. And what they did, and this has been reported by several news organizations, including the Milwaukee Journal or the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, is a woman came in to renew her driver's license. And Bruce Vilmetti is the first person, I believe, who reported the story. And she's 78 years old. And when she said, I want to renew my driver's license, I said, okay, walk across the lobby and back without your cane to prove to us that you can walk across the lobby without your cane. And she said, really? Is that something that's part of the test? And they said, yes, you have to do that. We will not give you a driver's license. So she said, okay. So she tried to do it. And in the process, she fell and broke her wrist. And they then said, okay, well, we're not going to renew your driver's license now. So here's the problem. Is that really something they're allowed to require you to do? Now, in Michigan, for instance, the eye test is conducted at the Secretary of State's office. They got a machine right there on the counter, and they check your eye, your eyes right there. Apparently in Wisconsin, you go to your own doctor and bring in something. At least that's what this woman did. She brought in something proving she had appropriate eyesight to drive. But this walk across the lobby thing without your cane, I've never been asked to walk across the lobby without a cane. And so obviously they decided that they needed to test her for this. But is that something that they're qualified to figure out? And is that the test? Walk across the lobby and back? I mean, do they have a designated line that she has to walk? Is it a certain distance? Were there any other obstacles there? Were there other people in the lobby? So the fact that she fell and broke her wrist is obviously the ugly part of the story. But the question is, what right do they have to ask you to do some test like that? Is that actually part of the test? So a federal court is going to decide this because the woman's estate has filed a civil rights lawsuit over the incident. Now, she's since passed away, and it was unrelated to the fall. Okay, all that happened then was she broke her wrist. But she is 78 years old, went to the doctor, got her eyes tested, went to the DMV to get her license, and that's when they said, oh, by the way, since you're carrying a cane, you've got to walk across the lobby and back without your cane to prove to us that you can do that. And of course, many people are going to ask and say, wait, do you really drive your car with your cane? Is walking without a cane something to do with, Doesn't make a lot of sense. Her husband actually objected at the time and asked the examiner how walking without her cane related to his wife's ability to drive a car or to get a driver's license. And the examiner said, no, that's part of the deal. And if you don't do it, you don't get a license. So she attempted to do what they asked her to do, and she fell and broke her wrist. The examiner denied her renewal and gave her a form saying she would need a general medical examination. And they put in the description, due to a fall at the DMV and confusion. So apparently the examiner diagnosed her as being confused because she fell. They didn't put in here, though, that the fall was caused by them asking her to do something. She later had surgery on her wrist, but died 4 months later from other causes. The lawsuit's being brought on behalf of her estate, and they are contending that the examiner, who they are not identifying, acted with malice and deliberate indifference to her rights. Now, here's the thing. When she fell and broke her wrist, they did create a report about this incident, as you might imagine. And strangely, the person who filled the report out didn't put in their badge number or their identifying information. And anytime you see something like that, you go, oh, why would you leave your name off that report? Is it perhaps you're concerned that people will find out who you are? You've done nothing wrong. You have nothing to hide. So according to the lawsuit, there is actually a process whereby if a DMV examiner thinks that a person is physically incapable of driving a car, there's a process they're supposed to go through. And they're supposed to then issue a 60-day temporary license and tell the person to go get a medical professional to examine them and sign off on their ability to drive. And nowhere does it say, oh, and make them walk back and forth across the lobby. That's just a wacky thing that this DMV apparently did on their own. So the lawsuit says that all of this was a violation of her rights. And you know, we know that in this day and age, we're becoming more sensitive to medical issues, right? And so if somebody has a medical issue, you know, we don't make fun of them for it. We try to accommodate them if we can. If you're certain places of business, you have to accommodate them. Schools and so on have to make accommodations. And so obviously, if somebody has a physical condition that keeps them from driving, then yes, they should have some process in place to see if a person can or cannot drive and whether it's medically appropriate to allow them or not allow them or disallow them, whatever you want to call it. But the point of the matter is that to have a person behind the counter at the DMV and say they're qualified to make that call based on what they observe, I don't think that's their pay grade, as we say. So the lawsuit says that making applicants who use canes or other personal mobility devices like crutches demonstrate they can walk without the device as a condition of getting a license violates the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. A DMV license examiner employed by defendants is not qualified to make a determination of whether an individual possesses a physical condition, impairment, or disability that might prevent such individuals from exercising reasonable and ordinary control in the operation of a motor vehicle, the suit states. And that is actually a very good statement, I believe, of reality. Okay, we've all been to the DMV or equivalent. In Michigan, it's called the Secretary of State's office. And people behind the counter can do the paperwork sometimes, and even that seems to be a challenge for them. And so, in case you're curious, the lawsuit seeks unspecified damages for her physical and emotional pain and suffering, mental anguish, and medical expenses. But, she did pass away a few months later. A Wisconsin Department of Transportation spokesperson said no one would discuss the issues raised in the lawsuit because the case is pending. So that's one of those situations where, like I said, what's that person behind the counter qualified to do? And I can tell you right now that I've told Secretary of State's office stories before, and also DMV stories. I've been to them in several states. But in Michigan in particular, it's a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to get. And as you know, I hope, I'm an attorney. So I know the law pretty well, and I've got the copies of the Michigan compiled laws behind me in the blue books I point to from time to time over my left shoulder. My left, not yours. And I've been in there before and had to explain the law to them more than once. And I like to give the example of I have a 17-foot Grumman aluminum canoe, and I have a 5-horsepower boat motor on it. And I run it around on lakes and rivers in the Michigan area and have a lot of fun with it. If you didn't know that, run Lehto canoe through the YouTube search engine and watch what pops up. I've got some videos out there of me in my canoe running around the Lake Superior or Tequamanon River and so on. And so I did the research and discovered that canoes do not need to be registered with the state of Michigan, but motorized boats do regardless of size. So my canoe with a motor on it becomes a motorized boat. And you might say, but Steve, it's still only a canoe. The law says canoes do not need to be registered, but the other law says any boat with a motor, regardless of size or type, does require to be registered. So my canoe needs to be registered. So I went to the Secretary of State's office, and I actually brought printouts of the law with me. I walked up the counter, and I said, I need to get a registration for my boat. The woman looks at it, and she goes, it's a canoe, you don't need a registration. I go, I'm going to put a motor on it, it needs registration. And she looked at me with that look that comes from somebody who's been doing their job for 20 years and is sick and tired of people telling them how to do their job. I've been doing my job for 28 years. I can give her the exact same look back. And I did. And I said, here's the law. And I slid it across the counter. And she looked at it. She looked at me. And I said, I'm an attorney. I'm trying to be nice about it. I'm not going to do the, I'm an attorney. I said, I'm an attorney, And she looked at it again. She walked over to a guy who was wearing a tie with short sleeves, probably a manager based on that level of dress. And I see them whispering and pointing, and occasionally they point at me, and they point at the paper, and they read it, and the guy goes in the back room, probably consults his manager, comes back out, goes like this. She walks back over, she says, okay. And they registered my canoe. I don't know what would have happened if I wasn't an attorney and didn't have the law with me. Because I'm pretty certain she would have said, you don't need to register your canoe. And I would have said, oh, okay, I just saved some money. That's what most people would think. Most people think, I just saved some money. The problem, of course, is somewhere down the road when I'm zipping along at 12 miles an hour in my 17-foot aluminum Grumman canoe with a 5-horsepower motor in the back, trying to get the thing to plane out. And a sheriff's deputy in a boat pulls up alongside me and says, hey, I don't see any MC numbers on your boat. In Michigan, the boat number starts with the letters MC for some weird reason. I guess because the I might look like a 1. And they would say, in this hypothetical version I'm telling you, they'd say, you don't have MC numbers in your boat. I'd say, I was told by the Secretary of State's office I don't need them. And a sheriff's deputy would then say, they were wrong. And guess who's the loser in that situation? Is it me or the Secretary? Like, I can't go back to them and say, hey, you told me I didn't need it. I could get a ticket right there and then on the spot. I could. Now, again, it didn't happen because I solved the problem at the counter. But the point simply is this, that they don't know the law half the time. All they do is 99% of the stuff they do is the same thing over and over again. Renew plates, renew licenses, renew plates, renew licenses. But in the renewing of the licenses, they understand of the physical conditions, for instance, with eyesight, right? And they actually have a test for that, and so there's a standardized test. I can't imagine it walking back and forth across a lobby as a standardized test. That's not. Can you imagine? What if the person walked across the lobby and came back and stumbled but stayed upright? Does that count? What if they did it in a comic fashion where they stumbled around in circles but still got over there and got back? Like, acting all goofy and stuff, What if they hopped on one foot all the way over and hopped all the way back on one foot? That's extremely hard to do if you're 87 or 78 years old. But, so I mean, that's the problem, 78 years old. So again, you would need to have a standardized test or an examination by a qualified medical professional, which is what the state apparently calls for, if we are to believe the lawsuit. And I suspect the lawsuit's correct, at least in its allegations, because they appear to have pulled out the statute and said, here's what this says. So it'll be interesting to see what happens somewhere down the road. And when that happens, I will update you. But until then, if you go to the DMV with a cane in Wisconsin, don't be surprised if they ask you to walk back and forth across the lobby a couple times, just for the fun of it. Questions or comments, put them below. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Wait a minute. The elders of the internet know who I am?